How did you feel about this movie? The day that Hollywood recognizes a pro-Israel film is going to be very interesting. But that's just my opinion. You have a biography of my guest, our guest this afternoon, Mr. Maurice Shohed. Maurice was born and raised in Baghdad. He fled Iraq with his family to Iran in 1970 during the rule of the Ba'ath Party. He was a member of the committee of experts that evaluated the Iraqi Jewish archives that were preserved at the National Archives and Records Administration. He is currently president of the World Organization of Jews from Iraq, whose goal is to protect, preserve, and promote Jewish communal assets still remaining in Iraq, including holy sites and shrines. He works at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and lives in Washington, D.C. We have more to talk about, but I'm going to turn it over to you, Maurice. How did you feel about this film?
First, I would like to thank you really for inviting me here to talk to you after the film. I thank also the person who sent me the email, Brian Gordon, and Albert Nassim, and the Babylonian Jewish Center, and whoever was involved with this event. First of all, as you realize, the purpose of having this film, not only to have some kind of history about Iraqi Jews, but also to use the Iraqi Judeo-Arabic language. As majority of you might know, in Arab countries, it's like in Spain, like in Ashkenazi world, Jews spoke their own dialect of the language. So, for example, from Spain, we have people speaking Ladino. In Eastern Europe, speaking different dialects of Yiddish. So this language of the film is about Judeo-Arabic, Iraqi Arabic. Obviously, the old generation who, at least three in the film, seems like grew up in Baghdad, their language was much more closer to the real Iraqi dialect than the rest of the performers. I was surprised about the person the main two people in the movie. Their names are Kabi, who stand out among the excellent performers of the movie, and also Rachel. According to her name that was shown after the end of the movie, she is, most probably from the name, she is an Israeli Palestinian. The way they mastered the dialect is really beyond expectations, and that's about the language. But as far as the history of that was shown in the movie about what happened to the Iraqi Jewry until 1950, I think the producer, Nassim Dayan, came short on explaining what took place before for those who don't know the history, especially the Ashkenazi.
Would you like to fill in a couple of blanks that you think were significantly absent in this film?
Well, I noticed the first thing that had my attention is they referred to the head of the Communist Party as the Armenian. The head of the Communist Party was never Armenian. He was Assyrian, and he was born in the town of Bartella in northern Iraq. His real name is Yusuf Salman Yusuf, known in the underground, communist underground as Fahad. Besides, in Iraq, they never said the Armenian or the Assyrian. They used to refer to them with their underground name. In the movie, they said the Armenian. He wasn't Armenian, that's one thing. Secondly, I think the producer would have added something very important if he would have said how the Communist Party and the Zionist underground came into being in Iraq. As far as we know from history books, following the killing of the 179 Jews in 1941, during a period when there was a pro-Nazi regime in Iraq in 1941, the young generation among the educated, especially Jews, were split. Some of them chose the Communist Party because for them at the time was, this is equality, this is the freedom, and this is the people will be treated equally. And those were mostly secular Jews, and they were highly educated. While the other part of the young generation that were educated thought, no, the solution is to join the underground, Jewish underground, which at the time Israel sent its emissaries to Israel, and they established the first routes in Baghdad, and from there to different kind of different other cities. So the situation continued until 1948, after the establishment of Israel, and the Jewish underground was divided to two. One was for educational purposes only, which like to educate the young generation with the Hebrew language and so on, and the other one with military training. What had my attention in the film, they are showing how the family of Yechezkel, like his brother, were taking the weapons from the house to someplace else after he was arrested. I heard from my parents one day in 1950, my cousins one day came to my parents. My father was like the sponsor of them. They didn't have any mother, and their real father got married. So my parents raised them. One day they came to us at home, and they told our parents that, oh, we are leaving tonight to Israel. So, of course, my parents couldn't understand it. They didn't know what's the situation. No, we are leaving tonight. Apparently, it was at the time when the Iraqi government started to arrest Jewish members of the underground. And my cousins never dealt with weapons. They were just with education. So my mother told us, after they left, within an hour, two brothers, after they left, she was looking for something to give them. After all, they are leaving to Israel without anything. They gave them all our jewelry, my mother's wedding ring and so on. And while she was looking at their stuff, because they left everything without taking, she saw what the film showed us about what was written in the newspapers about, of course, the newspaper is different. My mother found a lot of Jewish underground material that has to do with education. She spent the whole night burning them. So that's what happened at the time when they arrested the underground. So I think the producer would have done well just to reflect to those who didn't know the background of how the communism and the underground came into being would have been helpful.
How many of you, are there any questions out here of how many of you might have felt that you have more questions than answers in this film? Because I have to tell you that I found, maybe I was filling in the blanks on my own, but since this is not a documentary, this is a narrative, I think that this was the story of the experience and the oppression and the idea of the roundups, very familiar to post-World War II Jewish communities all over the world. I think that came across, did it not? Yes, there's a question over there.
It reminds me of my late father. My late dad was a physician in Baghdad, and he was Iraqi like any other one. He had a scholarship
We have a microphone coming to you, sir. Just wait one moment. Here it comes.
Yeah, it reminds me of my father's stories. He was a physician. He went to Royal School of Medicine in Baghdad and graduated in 1947. So part of the deal was that if he graduated medical school in Iraq, he should go to the Iraqi army, which he willingly did. And he was an officer in the Iraqi army for about a year and a half until the war of 1948 started. And out of no reason, all the Jewish doctors and all the Jewish officers was dismissed from the army. And he had to go back from northern Iraq to the capital of Baghdad and start on his own. And he was telling me that he had about a year and a half or 2 years of uncertainty about his future, whether he would last.
Did you hear that back there? Yeah, yeah. So I
And
think
finally, he left in 19...
Yeah, he left in 1950 with everybody else, yeah.
My family left in 1970. And it's interesting that they planned at the time to leave Iraq, but they got letters from Israel, from their relatives, that the situation in Israel is very hard. We are living in ma'abarot, in camps, and it's very difficult. And by then, my family already sold their belongings. They sold the house. It's 20% of real value, because everybody knew that if a Jew is selling a house, he's leaving the country. And they had to start anew in 1950-51. At the time, there were about, according to the figures of 1947, 135,000 Jews. Those who stayed behind in 1951, after the mass immigration, between 6,000 to 8,000 Jews.
how many Jews are left in Iraq today?
5. There are only 5 people who are still in Iraq. Their ages range from, I would say, mid-50s to mid-80s. The mid-80 woman is the head of the Jewish community. I am in contact with 2 of them, and just to see if everything is okay the way that we would expect. Of course, they don't have kosher meat or things like that, and the synagogue is closed, but they are managing. 3 of them, one is dentist, her brother is head of a medical department in a hospital, a 3rd is a retired lawyer, a 4th is dealing with jewelry, and the 5th, the head of the community, was a principal of Jewish school.
And what was the highest number of the Jewish community, the highest population number that, to your best of your knowledge, at its height? How many Iraqi Jews existed?
It says so in the film at the very end.
Bears repeating.
According to the Iraqi figures, in 1947, there were 135,000 Jews. But what happened at the time, there were 20,000 Jews who had, for 2-3 generations, Iranian citizenship. Though they spoke Iraqi Jewish dialect and they grew up in Iraq for 2-3 generations, because they kept their Iranian citizenship, they were considered Iranians. So they were not part in the count of the mass immigration of 1950-51.
Question.
So in like
Hold on. There's a mic coming. Speak into the mic.
so circa like 1949, what percentage of Baghdad, of the capital, was Jewish?
At the time, they said about 20-25% of the capital were Jews. But to me, the most important, really, when we're talking about the figures, is during the 40s. 2% of Iraq were Jews. They controlled 70 to 75% of the import trade to Iraq. That's very unusual.
So would it be safe to say that when everyone left, or such a significant population left in the 50s, that there was a big impact on the economy of Iraq?
Absolutely, and I am in touch with many Muslims, I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm in touch with many Muslims, Iraqi Muslims there, and many of them come to me and they say, what's happening today to us, to them, in Iraq, among themselves, as you know, with ISIS, with the Shiite and Sunnis, they tell me, all this happened after what we did to you Jews, after you left, and this is the result. Now, I have to be something, the thing that bothered me about the movie, excuse me if I have to mention this, in my political views, I am on the right. But I have to say that part of what was shown on the film are politically motivated. What we saw, that the Arabs are selling Virgo girls, and they are showing, the maid is showing their like the sexual things with the blood and showing the breast. This never happened in Iraq. This is a fantasy, I'm sorry, a fantasy of the Israeli film industry. This never happened in Iraq, and I'm someone who grew up and left at the age of 21. Furthermore, what we heard about Allahu Akbar, that was never in the streets, only in the mosques. The film was done in 2013 and finished in 2014. Allahu Akbar, the way we show it here, is today's modern things, what we see with ISIS, with Jabhat al-Nusra, with Al-Qaeda. This never happened in Iraq. So it's important for us to understand, and I think it would have been served better for all of us and all the community, all the Israelis, not to mention that part because it wasn't true.
There's a question here.
So apparently you stayed in Iraq, you grew up in Iraq for 20 years after the time of this film. May I ask what it was like for Jews in the period after this film until you left?
Of course, I was 1 year old when the mass immigration started at the time. As when I grew up in the 50s in Baghdad, I grew up in a Jewish school, and if we can call it, the golden period of the Jewish community was between 1958, 59, and 1963, when Abdul Karim Qasim was the Prime Minister of Iraq. He was ousted by the Ba'ath Party when they first came to Iraq, to power in 1963. At the time, in 1964, they stopped allowing the Jews to leave the country. They started to limit the amount of their withdrawal from the banks and so on and so forth. Of course, it came to its peak when the Six-Day War erupted, and because of the failure of the Arab countries, including Iraq, in the war with Israel, they had to show some kind of reason to the masses. If some of you were growing up at the time, if you remember, the Arab media was like, in the first day and a half, oh, we are close to Tel Aviv. We destroyed this number of Israeli planes. Even King Hussein, who didn't participate, King Hussein of Jordan, didn't participate in the war. There was a recording by Israel, like the head of Egypt, President Jamal Abdel Nasser, called him on the phone to tell him, what are you waiting for? We are close to Tel Aviv. And the end result of that, he joined the war after a day or two, and of course he lost the West Bank, among it Jerusalem. So the situation of the Jews became the worst during the Ba'ath Party when they came again to power in 1968. Tens of Jews were arrested. The first group of them was executed publicly, shown publicly, sorry, in the main square in Baghdad. And this I want to mention, when they showed in this film that the two Jews were executed publicly, in Iraq, they never did it in front of the masses. They did it in the prison, and they used to bring to the corpse to the main square for the masses to dance around them. Here, they showed it that it happened in front of the masses.
Hi, I don't have a question, I have a comment. I'm an Iraqi, Iranian, Jewish woman. I'm probably one of the youngest, if not one of the younger generation who can still speak and understand this language. For me, it was just amazing to actually see probably the first time that I saw a movie in Judeo-Arabic language from beginning to end, and I understood 90% of it, so that was an amazing, it's a dying language. But I want to say that I think this is so important, putting politics aside, just the story in itself. I personally enjoyed it, but I think it's so important that these stories be told. This is our history. This is the history of the Jews, and it relates to many other countries that have similar backgrounds. But I think it's so important to see this and to show these stories, especially to the young generation. Maurice, you know, my father, Dr. Albert Kabaza, he passed away 3 years ago, but it was my mission to have him write a book and tell these stories. The book is called The Last Tango in Baghdad. I helped him publish it. And it's my baby, it's my project. But I want to say, I think a lot of the Iraqis don't share these stories, don't reveal what happened. And me, myself, as editing the book, I learned about the atrocities and some of the rapes that went on when he was 80 years old. He never told me the story. They don't share it. It's kind of secret. And while I was reading the book and editing it, I read the story and told me, did you read that chapter? And I said, yes. So I think it's really, really important that these stories be told, even though some politics are wrong or some cases are wrong. I just think that the stories are so important to tell.
I second what you said, and there are a lot, at least that I know of, in Israel, are writing books the last 20 years about their experience in Iraq and documenting the history.
There's a question. Let's take somebody from the back.
Yes, hi. I just would like to add what happened in 68 and 69 here in New York, how the Jewish community got together and created an organization to impact and educate the American people who were far from knowing what was going on. I mean, Iraq was not on the map at that time. It was very foreign to the American psyche at that time that Jews were being killed and their passports were being confiscated. So I have my co-vice president, Dora Kubi, who is here also, and we created a committee called AMCOR, American Committee for Rescue and Resettlement of Iraqi Jews. And at the time we started 70 people in a basement, gathered together to organize and educate and impact the political and media, our political leaders. And what happened was the president of this organization was called Dr. Heskel Haddad. And we organized with a lawyer who was very politically connected, and he was connected with Senator Javits at that time, Jacob Javits, Senator of New York, and also Humphrey. Hubert Humphrey was Vice President of the United States. They became our honorary members. So from 70 people, within a year we had 1,000. And within 2 years, we had 2,000 members. We had a fee, a certain fee per year to be members of AMCOR, and we created and organized demonstrations in front of the United Nations.
Thank you. Let me ask you, pertaining to that, at this time, was there any awareness in the United States, for example? Was there any outreach from people in the underground to the United States, or was this strictly going through Iran and Israel to try and rescue Iraqi Jews?
There were reports from books, of course, you can read them, that the US embassy in Baghdad was involved in convincing the Iraqi regime at the time, the Iraqi government, to allow the Jews to leave the country. And I read this in Arabic. So the Arabic sources saying that, if accurate or not, I cannot say, but the fact that they said the American embassy in Baghdad, so it might have some roots to it.
We have one very patient person over here, and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you very much. Regina, thank you for the movie. I thought it was very powerful.
Oh, thank you.
I spent a year in Israel on a scholarship in '59 and '60 on Mechon L'Madrechei Chutz La'aretz, and I lived with people who were involved with illegal immigration from Syria, from Iraq, from Morocco, Tunisia, and went back and continued to do illegal immigration. I know the Mabarot. I know what it was like living in Israel when Israel was only 10 years old. And I've spent my whole life working in human rights field, and I thank you for the movie.
Thank you for the comment. One here, one there, and then one here. So 1, 2, 3.
Morris, is it true the clip in the movie when the family of Salman are leaving to Israel, they show Palestinian coming to their home, or it was a made-up story?
The dates are inaccurate because the mass immigration was in 1950-51, and the Palestinian refugees, when they came to Iraq, they came after the war of 1948. But for the producer and the film industry, they want to show like there was an exchange of population. Here, Palestinians are coming, and Jews from Iraq, in this case, are leaving to Israel. And as I said, there is some kind of political picture in different direction related to your comment. The Israeli Knesset decided this year that November 30th, which is at the end of the month, this year going to be the first time that the Knesset and Israel will recognize as the day of the Jews from Arab countries. Why November 30th? Because the United Nations decided at the time when they took the decision to part Israel and Palestine, it was November 29th. The partition. So now, November 30th, Jews from Arab countries is going to be days. So there are going to be a lot of delegations from all over the world. I know a big delegation from the United States. They're already invited to the house of the President of Israel. The Knesset is going to dedicate that day for something. So it's important to know. And of course, the fact that they decided it at this time because of the negotiations with the Palestinians, and they want to show that the Jews from Arab countries also left large assets in those countries.
Maurice, you, or the entire film in general, portrayed the relationship between the Jews and the local Muslim as very bad.
I'm sorry?
The general perception here was that the relationship between the Jews and the Muslims were very bad.
Do you hear that back there?
No.
The comment is that the general perception seems to have been that the relationship between Jews and Muslims was very bad. You're talking about during this period in the movie?
No. Before, yes.
Yes.
During the period and before. As much as I know, there were also some very positive relationship between Jews and Arabs.
And the comment goes on that to the best of our commentators' knowledge, that there were also some positive relationships and positive interactions, which were kind of alluded to at that dinner at Abu George's house.
Not only that, even on a daily basis. I mean, I know that, like, my parents came from Iraq in 1951, and I know that, like, when my mother used to go outside on the street, everybody would say, "Oh, this is Mrs. So-and-so." Nobody would touch her. Nobody would harm her in any way. And another thing I know, like, for example, when my father declared that he wanted to come to Israel, obviously all his assets were confiscated, and he trusted some of the Arab. He gave them like rolls of fabric, and he got them back later on.
So you don't have rights to claim them back?
Not those rolls, though.
Okay.
But could you comment about
We
the
have-
positive relationship between Jews and Arabs?
I agree with what you said. There were good relations between the Jews and the Arabs. But whenever a political situation comes up in the Middle East, things changed. It started when the Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, visited Hitler and then came to Baghdad, to Iraq, and was able to connect with the Minister of Interior, Rashid al-Gailani, that eventually became Prime Minister in 1941 and became, caused the mass killing, the Farhud, known as the Farhud. But even after the Farhud, during the 40s, though many Iraqi Jews left to India, to the land of Israel, after 41, during the period until 1948, they were able to continue their good relationship with the Muslims the way it was before, and even expanded their business. And that's why we succeeded, we who stayed in Iraq after 1951, we succeeded financially in Iraq until things changed after the Six-Day War. So as I second what you said, there were good relationships among the Jews and the Arabs, and we have to understand, those who dealt with politics, communism, and underground were very minority among the community.
Okay, you have one last question here. Hold on, here comes a mic.
I was wondering whether there is similarity that you might know about with other Arab countries. Egypt, Jordan, did the same kind of thing happen? I know understand that there are very, very few Jews in any of those countries. Were there persecutions, or how did they get out?
In Libya, for example, there were assassination of Jews in 1945. It didn't happen in Egypt because the British influence was stronger, and they were able to convince the king at the time, Farouk, after 1948, to let the Jews leave. And even Jamal Abdel Nasser, after he took over in a coup in 1952, he allowed the Jews to leave without any executions, as we saw here. But those who left, some of them were able to sell their assets, some are not. Today, we have the largest Jewish community in Arab country in Morocco. I have heard different figures that ranges from 13,000 to 17,000, but many of them go back and forth to Israel also. And Jews from Moroccan descent come from Israel to visit the religious sites in Morocco. Interestingly, in Syria, today there are only 2 Jews. A family was able to leave Syria a few months ago when they were threatened by those organizations like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, and of course with the help of Israel, they came to Israel. So I heard this from the Jewish community activists of the Syrian community.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, but I think we should all thank Maurice Shofet for helping us shed light on
Thank you
this.
for having me.